I was 70 years old when my only son pointed a crystal glass at my face and told me to stop wasting his money. Not my money, his. The sentence landed harder than the glass he shattered on the white linen table. It landed in the quiet place inside my chest where I still kept my wife's voice, my first payroll ledger, and the photograph of a young man in a brown work jacket standing beside a rusted service van with $300 in the company account. My name is Samuel Reeves. For 46 years, I built Reeves Mechanical Systems from a two-man heating repair outfit behind a tire shop in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, into a regional industrial climate control company worth $48 million. We serviced hospitals, distribution warehouses, federal office buildings, and entire school districts. I had crawled through boiler rooms that smelled like burned dust and wet concrete. I had slept in my truck during snow emergencies because children needed heat in classrooms by morning. I had missed birthdays, anniversaries, and one Thanksgiving because a nursing home's rooftop unit froze solid during an ice storm. My wife, Margaret, never complained. She was the reason the company had a soul. When I was all elbows, invoices, and stubborn pride, Margaret remembered names. She sent flowers when technicians lost parents. She delivered casseroles when apprentices had babies. She knew which suppliers were honest and which bankers smiled too much. When I wanted to expand too fast, she tapped the side of her coffee mug and said, "A building without load-bearing walls still looks fine until the roof comes down." She was my load-bearing wall. 3 years after cancer took her, I was sitting at a private table inside the Alder Room, a polished steakhouse in downtown Harrisburg where the walls were dark walnut and the air smelled of butter, peppercorn, and old money. Soft piano music floated through the dining room. Waiters moved like ghosts. Silverware clicked softly against porcelain plates, and the lights above us glowed amber enough to make everyone look kinder than they really were. It was supposed to be a dinner in Margaret's memory. Across from me sat my son, Brandon Reeves, 36 years old, Chief Executive Officer for exactly 11 months. He wore a navy Italian suit, a watch that cost more than my first service van, and the impatient expression of a man who believed the world was taking too long to recognize his greatness. Beside him sat his wife, Lauren, a former luxury real estate broker with a pearl necklace, perfect hair, and the kind of smile that never reached the eyes. She kept checking her phone beneath the table, the screen lighting her face blue whenever conversation turned toward Margaret. I should have seen the rot earlier. For months, Brandon had been distant, short, and increasingly theatrical about pressure. He spoke about scaling, market dominance, and legacy monetization, as though the company was a casino chip instead of the life's work of hundreds of families. He had replaced practical managers with expensive consultants. He had installed marble in the executive lobby while delaying raises for the warehouse crew. He had started calling my old rules sentimental friction. That was the phrase he used. After dinner, the waiter cleared away our plates and poured the last inch of red wine into Lauren's glass. I reached into the inside pocket of my gray suit jacket and pulled out my checkbook. It was leather-bound, scratched at the corners, and older than Brandon's marriage. I placed it on the table with both hands. Brandon's eyes moved to it immediately. "I've been thinking about your mother all week," I said. My voice was calm. It always is when I am about to make a decision that matters. Margaret loved St. Anselm's Community Clinic. They treated her with dignity during those first months when we didn't know how bad things were. Their roof has been leaking for 2 winters. I'm going to give them $72,000 from my personal account to replace it before January. I expected silence, maybe a nod, maybe one human moment in which my son remembered the woman who packed his lunches, corrected his essays, and cried quietly in the laundry room when his fever hit 104. Instead, Brandon's face changed. He grabbed his old-fashioned glass so hard his knuckles blanched. Then he slammed it onto the table. The crystal cracked with a sharp, violent snap that cut through the piano music and turned heads at 6 nearby tables. Amber bourbon bled across the white cloth. Ice cubes rolled toward my checkbook. Lauren's heels struck him hard under the table, but it was already too late. "Stop wasting my money," he hissed. The restaurant went still. Brandon leaned forward, red rising up his neck above his silk tie. $72,000 for a clinic roof? Are you out of your mind? You cannot keep throwing family assets at every sad little cause that makes you feel less lonely. Family assets. I looked at him, and for the first time in my life, I did not see my son. I saw a stranger wearing my blood like a borrowed coat. I saw a man who thought because he had sat in my chair for 11 months, the sweat behind every brick, every truck, every insurance policy, every dollar of retained earnings had somehow become his inheritance before I was even dead. I did not shout. I picked up my checkbook, wiped one drop of bourbon from the corner with my napkin, and slid it back into my pocket. Then I placed $200 bills beside the broken glass and stood. My knees hurt because 70 is not a myth, but my spine was straight. Lauren whispered, "Samuel, please," in the tone people use when they want witnesses to think they are reasonable. I walked out without answering. The cold hit me outside like a wet slap. Harrisburg wind came off the Susquehanna River and pushed through my wool coat, carrying the smell of exhaust, frozen pavement, and chimney smoke. Behind me, the alder room glowed warm and expensive. In front of me, the street lights reflected on patches of black ice. My hands were steady. The next morning, Brandon and Lauren arrived at my house at 8:12 a.m., with a gourmet fruit basket, a linen apology card, and a performance so polished it should have charged admission. I lived in a stone colonial in Camp Hill, the house Margaret and I bought in 1998 when Brandon was 8 and still believed thunder was God-moving furniture. The front hall smelled faintly of lemon oil and old books. The grandfather clock ticked in the same rhythm it had kept for 27 years. They brought cold air and perfume inside. "Dad," Brandon said, looking pale and rehearsed. "Last night was unacceptable. I was exhausted. I'd had too much bourbon. The expansion into York and Lancaster is killing me. Supply delays, labor costs, bond requirements." I snapped. Lauren placed one manicured hand over his. "He has been under impossible strain, Samuel. But we are also worried about you. Grief can make people vulnerable. Large donations, sudden decisions, isolation in a big house. We've been reading about elder exploitation." There it was. I kept my face soft, the way I used to do with nervous subcontractors who were about to confess they had missed a deadline. Lauren continued. She explained that they had quietly created a family preservation trust to protect my assets from scammers, predatory charities, and what she called emotionally manipulative institutions. Brandon nodded like a man who had practiced nodding in the mirror. "It's temporary," he said, "just a safeguard." I asked one question. "Who drafted it?" Lauren answered too quickly. "Bancroft, Vale and Sutter. Excellent firm, very discreet." A good liar always thinks discreet means clean. I thanked them for stopping by. I let them leave the fruit basket on the kitchen counter beneath Margaret's framed recipe cards. I watched their leased black Range Rover roll down the driveway. Then I poured coffee into a chipped company mug from 1994 and stared at the ridiculous gold ribbon on the basket. The coffee tasted burned. At 11:40 a.m., my personal card was declined at Miller's Garage for a $486 winter service on my 1979 Ford F-250. The old truck was forest green, manual transmission, no GPS, no touchscreen, no subscription anything. Arthur Miller, the mechanic, looked more embarrassed than I felt. "Mr. Reeves, I'm sorry," he said quietly. "It says declined." I stepped outside into the wind and called my private banker. Nathaniel Brooks had managed my personal accounts for 14 years. He usually answered before the second ring. That morning, he answered on the 7th. "Samuel," he said, and his voice sounded like someone standing too close to a fire. "I need you to listen carefully. I can't authorize access to those funds." "It is my account." "I know." "My name is on it." "I know." The wind pushed grit across the garage lot. Somewhere behind me, an impact wrench barked against a lug nut. Nathaniel inhaled shakily, then said the words that turned the entire world a few degrees colder. "Your son obtained an emergency co-conservatorship order this morning from Dauphin County Probate Court. The filing includes a physician's affidavit claiming cognitive decline and financial vulnerability. Your liquid accounts have been frozen pending review. Brandon has temporary authority over personal expenditures." I looked at the cracked asphalt beneath my boots. A conservatorship. I was 70, not dead. My mind still carried 40 years of payroll formulas, depreciation schedules, vendor codes, and every serial number of every rooftop unit in our first hospital contract. Yet in one morning, with one judge's signature and one purchased medical opinion, my son had made me a legal passenger in my own life. That was when grief left the room. What remained was math. I paid Arthur in cash from the emergency envelope I kept behind the truck's bench seat. Then I drove straight to Reeves Mechanical Headquarters on Front Street, a 5-story glass and steel building overlooking the river. I had approved the foundation pour myself. I knew where the storm drains ran, where the server rooms sat, and which loading dock camera had a blind spot because the installer had mounted it 4 inches too high in 2009. The building smelled like floor wax and coffee. Inside the lobby, employees moved around me with tablets, badges, and paper cups. No one expected the old founder to arrive unannounced in work boots and a canvas jacket. I walked to the executive elevator and pressed my founder badge against the scanner. Red light. Access denied. I tried again. Access denied. Brandon had erased me from my own building before lunch. A younger man might have made a scene. A foolish man might have demanded security call the CEO. I did neither. I stepped away from the scanner and waited beside a framed photograph of Margaret cutting the ribbon at the new fabrication wing in 2011. 10 minutes later, a junior analyst came through carrying 2 banker boxes and 3 coffees. I held the door for him. He thanked me without looking up. That was how I entered my company. On the 4th floor, I found the records room half emptied. On the executive floor, I saw Lauren through the glass wall of the conference room. She was signing transfer documents beside 2 attorneys and a man from Keystone Capital Lending. Stacks of property folders sat in front of her. Warehouse deeds, equipment titles, fleet liens, commercial parcels we had acquired slowly, carefully, over decades. Lauren had no officer title at Reeves Mechanical. She had no authority to sign anything, but she was signing anyway. At 2:26 p.m., I walked into a diner on Derry Street that smelled of fryer oil, burnt coffee, and bleach. In the back booth sat Ellen Ward, my former corporate attorney, and the only lawyer I trusted more than silence. She was 63, wore steel gray hair pinned tightly at the back, and had once dismantled a fraudulent supplier claim using nothing but a yellow legal pad and a fax timestamp. I slid the conservatorship notice across the table. Ellen read without speaking. Her jaw tightened once. Then she opened her laptop, connected through a secured hotspot, and began pulling county records, trust filings, property transfers, and UCC liens. Her fingers moved with surgical patience. Mine stayed folded on the table. The waitress refilled our coffee twice. By 3:18 p.m., Ellen found the trust. The Reeves Family Preservation Trust had been created 8 days earlier. Brandon was primary trustee. Lauren was successor trustee. The trust instrument gave them broad authority over personal assets in cases of suspected incapacity. Attached was a medical letter from Dr. Calvin Merritt, a private geriatric psychiatrist I had met exactly once during a 15-minute wellness screening arranged by Brandon. The letter diagnosed moderate cognitive impairment. I remembered that screening. Dr. Merritt had asked me to draw a clock, remember 3 words, and count backward by 7s. I had done all of it while correcting the year printed wrong on his intake form. Ellen kept digging. At 3:47 p.m., she turned the laptop toward me. My Camp Hill house had been transferred by quitclaim deed 3 weeks earlier to Brandon and Lauren Reeves. My signature appeared at the bottom in black ink, smooth, confident, and entirely false. The notary was a woman named Patricia Klein, who had retired 4 years earlier and died the previous April. Dead women make poor witnesses. Ellen looked at me over the screen. "Do not go home tonight." I nodded. "They can accuse you of trespassing in your own house." "I understand." "Samuel, I need to be clear. This isn't a family argument. This is elder financial exploitation, forgery, bank fraud, wire fraud, possible tax evasion, and if they are moving company assets across state lines, federal prosecutors will care." For the first time all day, I smiled. Then we should make them care loudly. That night, I checked into a roadside motel under the name Sam Keller and paid cash. The room smelled like damp carpet and lemon disinfectant. The heater clicked every 11 seconds, a tired, metallic sound that kept time while I opened an old contact list from a phone that had never touched the company network. At 10:04 p.m., I called Milo Vargas, a private investigator I had once hired to locate a fleet manager who vanished with 3 service trucks and a cocaine habit. Milo did not ask why. At 11:32 p.m., he handed me a military-grade encrypted drive, a magnetic bypass strip, and a paper bag containing a burner phone in the parking lot of a closed pharmacy. His breath smoked in the cold. Mine did not. I gave him $12,000 in cash and a list of 3 license plates. At 1:55 a.m., I parked 2 blocks from Reeves Mechanical headquarters. Brandon had upgraded the lobby cameras, the elevator logs, and the electronic locks. He had not upgraded the old maintenance tunnel behind the loading dock because he did not know it existed. In 2004, when the building was constructed, I insisted on a storm service corridor to access the primary electrical room during floods. City inspectors hated it. I paid for extra concrete and kept the original brass key. Old men remember old doors. The tunnel smelled of rust, standing water, and cold stone. My flashlight beam shook only because my wrist had arthritis, not because I was afraid. At the end of the corridor, the steel service door opened with a heavy mechanical click. No badge, no camera, no digital record. I entered the basement. The server room still ran behind a reinforced concrete wall. Reeves Mechanical had moved most systems to the cloud, but I had ordered the original mainframe to remain tethered as a redundancy. It was protected by biometric authority that predated Brandon's administration. Fingerprint, retina, founder override. I placed my palm on the scanner. The red light swept across my fingers. The lens extended and read my right eye. For 3 seconds, the machine hummed while I imagined police lights washing the basement walls. Then the door released with a deep electronic clack that sounded, to me, like Margaret laughing softly at an arrogant child. I was in. Rows of server racks blinked blue and green in the dark. Cooling fans roared. The air smelled like hot plastic and filtered dust. I plugged the encrypted drive into the legacy port and bypassed the glossy accounting interface Brandon's consultants loved. I went beneath it, into raw vendor payments, collateral schedules, wire origins, and shadow directories no one renamed because no one alive at the company except me remembered they existed. Fraud has rhythm. Legitimate business has irregular edges. Real vendors bill odd amounts at odd intervals with messy descriptions and human delays. Fake vendors are too clean. At 2:43 a.m., I found the first bleed. Red Maple Logistics, LLC, $48,000 every Friday, coded as Emergency Supply Chain Coordination, registered in Delaware to a mailbox, created 6 days after Brandon became CEO. Then came North Star Procurement Group, then Iron Line Advisory, then Cobalt Strategy Partners, then Larkspur Industrial Consulting. In 11 months, Brandon had siphoned $4,860,000 from operating accounts into shell companies. That alone would have destroyed most men. It only made me keep typing. Because the company's cash position was worse than $5 million could explain, the real bomb sat in a folder labeled Foreign Liquidity. Brandon had pledged company trucks, warehouse equipment, fabrication machinery, and 2 distribution centers as collateral for leveraged offshore investment accounts. He had used Reeves Mechanical's assets to borrow $31 million from unregulated lenders through a Cayman intermediary. The money flowed into foreign exchange contracts, cryptocurrency positions, and private derivatives so volatile the margin reports pulsed red across the screen. He had not inherited my company. He had strapped dynamite to it. At 3:18 a.m., the download completed. I copied ledgers, wire confirmations, IP login records, board minutes, forged authorizations, loan documents, and Brandon's personal access logs. Then I wiped the local traces of my entry and left the server room exactly as I had found it. But records of past crimes were not enough. I needed tomorrow's crime. So I climbed the stairwell to the executive floor. The carpet outside Brandon's office swallowed my steps. The moonlight through the glass wall made his renovated suite look like a showroom for a man with no taste and too much insecurity. He had removed my oak desk and installed a white marble slab. He had built a private bar where Margaret's reading chair used to sit. That offended me more than the money. Behind a wall panel near the wet bar, I found the old conduit channel for the office intercom system. I placed a pinhole recorder inside the vent, connected to a secure transmitter Milo had provided. Then I left the building before dawn, walked through freezing mist back to my truck, and drove to Ellen Ward's office with the encrypted drive in my coat pocket. Ellen arrived at 6:30 a.m. By 9 o'clock, we had 3 red binders, each indexed with tabs: personal theft, corporate fraud, medical conspiracy. Ellen made duplicate digital copies and sent sealed evidence packages to 2 federal contacts, one at IRS Criminal Investigation and one at the U.S. Attorney's Office for the Middle District of Pennsylvania. We did not file everything at once. A good case is not thrown, it is placed. Then we waited. At 1:14 p.m., the recorder captured Brandon and Lauren in his office. Lauren spoke first. The ambulance service is confirmed for Thursday at 7:30. Merritt signed the updated evaluation. He says Samuel is agitated, paranoid, and financially reckless. Brandon laughed. It was small and ugly. He is financially reckless. He wanted to give $70,000 to a clinic. The memory facility has a private wing available, Lawrence said. 30-day stabilization. No visitors except approved family. How much did Merritt want? Another $50,000. Pay him from Iron Line. Paper rustled near the microphone. Ice clinked in a glass. The old office that once smelled of Margaret's peppermint tea now carried the sound of my son purchasing my disappearance. Lauren continued. Once he's admitted, we initiate the Cayman transfer. $12 million first. Then we liquidate the York property before the lenders call margin. And Dad? Brandon asked. Lauren paused. Your father will be sedated, confused, and angry, which helps us. No one believes an angry old man in a locked memory unit. I did not move when I heard it. Ellen did. She whispered something I will not repeat. By Thursday morning, the trap was ready, but it was not theirs anymore. It was mine. At 7:05 a.m., I returned to the Camp Hill house wearing a tan cardigan, soft shoes, and the expression of a defeated father. Brandon and Lauren were already inside because, legally, on paper, the house was theirs. Lauren stood in my kitchen beside the marble island, holding a mug she had not earned the right to touch. Brandon watched me with rehearsed pity. Dad, he said gently, we're going to get you help. The house smelled like fresh coffee and Lauren's sharp floral perfume. Margaret's curtains moved slightly in the heat vent's breath. I looked around at the rooms where my family had once been real. Then I nodded. I don't want trouble, I said. Brandon almost smiled. That was his first mistake that morning. At 7:28, two private medical transport workers arrived with a clipboard and a folding chair restraint they tried to call supportive seating. Behind them came Dr. Calvin Merritt in a camel coat, carrying a leather folder and the expression of a man who had spent his career being believed. A police cruiser idled at the curb, requested by Brandon in case of emotional escalation. I made no escalation. I asked for one thing. Before I leave, may I have my red binder from the study? It has Margaret's clinic photographs. Lauren sighed. Brandon waved his hand. Fine. Second mistake. I walked into the study alone and picked up the red binder waiting on the desk. It did not contain photographs. It contained copies of the forged deed, the dead notary record, Dr. Merritt's first clean screening, the paid diagnosis, wire transfers to his consulting LLC, and a transcript of the recorded conversation in Brandon's office. A second copy sat with Ellen. A third sat with federal agents. I returned to the foyer carrying it against my chest. That was when the black SUVs turned onto the street. Not one, 4. They stopped behind the police cruiser with quiet precision. Doors opened. Men and women in dark jackets stepped out, their badges visible against the gray morning. IRS Criminal Investigation. FBI. 2 deputy U.S. Marshals. Ellen Ward stepped from the last vehicle with a court order in one hand and the calm face of a woman who had already won before anyone else knew the game had started. Brandon looked at me. I opened the binder. The sound of metal handcuffs leaving a belt is small, just a click and a scrape. But in a quiet foyer beneath the portrait of my dead wife, it carried like church bells. Agent Marisol Keene from IRS-CI asked Brandon Reeves to step away from the staircase. Agent Thomas Bell from the FBI asked Lauren not to touch her phone. Dr. Merritt tried to leave through the front door and found a deputy marshal standing there with one hand on the knob. No one shouted. Ellen read the emergency order aloud. The conservatorship was suspended pending fraud review. The deed transfer was frozen. All trustee authority was revoked. Warrants were active for corporate records, personal devices, shell company accounts, and Dr. Merritt's financial files. The memory facility admission order was void. Lauren spoke first. This is a misunderstanding. I turned one page in the binder. Ellen handed Agent Bell the transcript. The agent read one line silently, then looked at Lauren. Do you deny arranging a private medical transport for Mr. Reeves based on a paid diagnosis? Lauren's lips parted. No sound came out. Brandon found his voice in pieces. Dad, I was protecting the company. I looked at him for a long moment. I remembered him at 6 years old, asleep on my chest during a thunderstorm. I remembered Margaret trimming his hair in the kitchen while he squirmed and laughed. I remembered paying for business school, the wedding, the failed first startup, the second chance, the third chance, the chair he had never earned. Then I remembered the words, my money. You were protecting yourself, I said. His face folded, not with remorse, with fear. There is a difference. The agents took them separately. Lauren's bracelets clicked against the cuffs as they led her down the porch steps. Brandon kept turning around, trying to catch my eye, as if one final look of panic could make me become his father instead of his witness. Dr. Merritt was pale enough to look transparent. Neighbors watched from driveways. The black SUVs left one by one. The street returned to ordinary quiet. A dog barked 2 houses away. The heater inside the foyer clicked on. Margaret's portrait watched everything with the same half-smile she wore when a salesman lied to her and thought she did not notice. I stood alone in the house for exactly 9 minutes. Then I went to the kitchen. On the marble island, where Lauren had planned to leave my medication schedule and facility paperwork, I placed 3 things: a copy of the revoked conservatorship, a printout of Brandon's frozen bank accounts, and Margaret's old recipe card for chicken soup. On the back of the card, in red marker, I wrote one sentence: You mistook patience for weakness. By noon, federal agents were inside Reeves Mechanical headquarters. By 2:15 p.m., the company's emergency board removed Brandon as CEO. By Friday, all shell company accounts were frozen. By the following week, Keystone Capital withdrew from the fraudulent property transfers and began cooperating. Dr. Merritt's license was suspended pending criminal proceedings. Patricia Klein's dead notary seal became the kind of detail prosecutors love because juries understand it instantly. Dead women do not notarize deeds. Brandon called me from his attorney's office 6 days later. I answered on a burner phone from a rest stop outside Asheville, North Carolina. I was driving south in the old Ford, the bed covered by a canvas tarp, Margaret's ashes in a small cedar box on the passenger seat. The mountains ahead were blue in the late afternoon. The truck smelled like vinyl, engine oil, and black coffee from a thermos. Dad, he said. His voice was small. They froze everything. I know. My accounts, Lauren's accounts, the trust, the company distributions, everything. I know. You have to tell them I didn't mean to hurt you. I watched a hawk circle over the tree line. You did not fail to hurt me, Brandon. You failed to finish. He started crying then, maybe for himself, maybe for the company, maybe for the version of his life where consequences were things that happened to other people. I did not ask. You're my father, he whispered, and you tried to make me a prisoner. Silence stretched across the line. Behind him I heard a printer, a muffled voice, and the dry, institutional hum of fluorescent lights. My son was learning what rooms sound like when nobody inside them loves you enough to lie for you anymore. I made mistakes, he said. No, I answered. A mistake is ordering the wrong compressor size. A mistake is missing a tax deadline by 1 day. You forged my signature, bribed a doctor, stole from employees, and tried to bury me in a memory unit so you could outrun your own debt. He sobbed once. I did not soften. Your mother believed legacy meant responsibility, I said. You believed it meant permission. That is why you lost both. Then I ended the call, removed the battery, and dropped the pieces into 2 separate trash cans at the rest stop. I did not disappear because I was afraid. I disappeared because freedom deserves distance. 3 months later, Reeves Mechanical survived under an interim board chaired by Ellen Ward. The employee pension fund was protected. The warehouses stayed open. The technicians kept their trucks. The company paid back what could be recovered and sued for the rest. Brandon and Lauren faced federal charges tied to wire fraud, bank fraud, conspiracy, identity theft, tax evasion, and elder financial exploitation. Dr. Merritt pleaded first. Men who sell false diagnoses often discover prison is full of people who also thought paperwork could be adjusted later. Brandon finally wrote me a letter. It arrived at a small rented cottage near Beaufort, South Carolina, where Spanish moss hung from oak branches and the air smelled of salt, rain, and warm pine. I read it on the porch at sunrise. He apologized in 12 paragraphs. He said greed had confused him. He said Lauren pressured him. He said he had been terrified of failure. He said he finally understood how much I had sacrificed. Maybe some of it was true. Truth arriving late is still late. I folded the letter and placed it in a drawer beside Margaret's wedding ring. I did not write back that day. Forgiveness is not a vending machine where remorse goes in and absolution drops out. Some debts require payment before language means anything. Still, I hoped prison would teach him what privilege had not. Every morning now I walk along the marsh before the heat rises. My knees complain. My hands ache. Some days I miss the noise of the shop floor, the smell of cutting oil, the ring of dispatch phones, the feeling of solving a problem before breakfast. But I do not miss marble offices. I do not miss boardroom applause. I do not miss sitting across from a son who looked at my life and saw only an account balance. I gave the $72,000 to St. Anselm's Clinic after all. The roof was finished before the first heavy snow. Ellen mailed me a photograph of the new shingles, dark gray against a clean winter sky. On the back, the clinic director wrote, "Margaret's kindness still shelters people." I kept that note on my refrigerator for a month. That is what money is for, not control, not vanity, not buying doctors, judges, silence, or escape routes through offshore accounts. Money is stored labor, stored time, stored pain. It should build roofs, pay workers, protect dignity, and buy a tired old man enough gasoline to drive away from people who forgot he was human. My son told me to stop wasting his money, so I did. I stopped wasting my life on his entitlement. I stopped wasting my grief on people who used it as evidence against me. I stopped wasting my silence in rooms where criminals mistook quiet for surrender. And when the time came, I did not raise my voice. I opened the red binder.